but the work must continue. And it has to continue in a strategic way that builds upon not only our passion and our moral commitment, but on evidence and research. And that's why it's really a delight to introduce to you my friend, Damon Williams. So I do have to begin by saying I've absolutely failed to convince Damon to become a university president. Even today I saw him, I sat down and I said, may I spend the time trying to convince you? No, I could not. Damon's got a bigger stage and a phenomenal mission right now. But Damon's work in inclusive excellence has really focused upon building evidence, building tactics, understanding the different paradigms, understanding the different pros and cons. His background and scholarship helps us and other campuses to impact tangible change. It is so easy, after all, to talk about diversity. It is so wonderful to talk about inclusive excellence as vague, abstract terms. This book is a manual. This book helps us understand strategies, tactics, pros, cons, ways forward. His experience in higher education and now in the nonprofit sector helps us all to understand that diversity and inclusive excellence can be moved forward. Part of my, I think, probably favorite learning from Damon, and I've learned a lot through many years of working with Damon and AACU and others, is that diversity is not just passion. It is not just about morals. It is not just about justice. It's also an intellectual effort. And at the heart of this intellectual effort is wisdom and truth and research and building a new and better world. In September 2013, after my failure to convince Damon to become a university president, he assumed a new role of global responsibility as a senior vice president for program training and youth development services for the Boys and Girls Club of America. He is the chief educator officer for the BGC movement. He leads the national strategy for their strategic outcomes areas. Prior to BGCA, he served for 5 years as Associate Vice Chancellor, Vice Provost, Diversity Officer, and member of the Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he was the founding leader of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement, which includes the nation's largest pre-college to college pipeline development program, the world's only hip-hop urban arts scholarship program learning community. How cool is that? I want one, don't you? Yes. Innovative campus-wide partnerships that focus on STEM achievement and faculty diversification. He also established a 4-city partnership with the National Posse Foundation. He is a 4-time scholar in residence for the Association of American Colleges and Universities. He has served as a 2-time scholar in residence for the prestigious American Council of Education Fellowship Mid-Year Institute. He serves on the ACE Equity and Inclusion Advisory Board, the UC Berkeley Equity and Advisory Board, the Gallaudet University Diversity Advisory Board, and the National Diversity Council Executive Board. His most recent books provide a sophisticated and nuanced approach to assist leaders with the overall process of leading diversity-themed change and developing sound diversity infrastructures and strategies. Damon received his PhD from the University of Michigan and his BA and MA from Miami University in Ohio. It is a great pleasure and honor to introduce you to Damon Williams.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I don't even have to go up there. I'm all mic'd up and ready to go. The theme for the day is a powerful one. Let's see if I can get this. There's a clicker somewhere. The theme today is a powerful one. This idea of moving beyond bias to truly enable community. There's so much in that. Moving beyond bias to truly enable community. One of the things that I believe so importantly, that's the absolute hallmark of that, is how do we each, every day, make individual choices in our lives to cut against the grain, to do something different, to enable a new possibility. One of the things one of my mentors told me a long, long time ago, he said, Damon, he said, there's going to come a time in your life where you're going to need individuals who sign off on you, who don't look like you. And what he was speaking to was this idea that I was African-American, an African-American male, and that at some point in my career, I was going to need folks who believed in me and the possibilities of what I could do, who did not look like me. It is my honor to call Rebecca Chop one of those persons. She is the real deal. And I am so thankful for all of you that she's now here in your community. As was noted before, my work is centered around these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, issues of organizational change, issues that we don't see on the back of that screen there, but that's okay. I really don't need them. I believe life is defined by the burning questions that you have. The burning questions. What are the questions that are going to get up and drive you each and every day? For me, those questions have always centered around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and change. From early on. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in the inner city, in a pretty rugged neighborhood. Like I say, I grew up right where the two T's met in ghetto. Like my house was right there in the middle. But there was a tremendous amount of love all the way around. But at the age of 15, I went off to boarding school. And so I whisked off to this new environment. And in that new environment, I was not in the majority as I was in my primarily African-American and educational environment, all African-American. I was very much in the minority. I was one of only 8 African-Americans, one of only about 10 students of color at the entirety of my school who were historically underrepresented minorities. So at the age of 15, I went into a totally different context, totally different environment, and it was there that these questions, these burning questions of diversity began to take hold. I'll never forget the fact that I was there and I felt very much like an outsider. I saw so much, and I came from a very different background that did not have as much, and I felt as if maybe I wasn't good enough. I felt as if I wasn't quite fitting in. Some of it was fun and games. Others, it was a very serious matter of success and how to be successful. I was in those environments and I felt like an outsider, but I would look up on the wall and there was something very powerful that I would see on the wall. And what I saw is the exploits of my father, because my father had been in a second cohort to integrate the boarding school. And so here I was in that environment, very much an outsider from a race, economic, experiential perspective, but very much an insider because the culture of the institution, my father was a part of shaping it. And it was there that I started thinking about these research questions. I started thinking about these burning questions. And the first burning question is, so what is diversity in the 21st century and why is it so important in the new economy? Started thinking about, so what is diversity? We hear it all the time. What is it? The second question, how do we engage in a broad conversation of diversity and inclusion that creates the big tent, but yet still give privilege to the unique needs and dynamics and issues of women? Remember the LGBT community, individuals coming from economically vulnerable backgrounds, issues of race, issues of disability. How do we create that big tent? That was something I was really fascinated and interested in from the very beginning. Third, what does it mean to lead strategically around these issues? Strategically. Not as a matter of, I think, not as a matter of, this is how we did it over here, but to truly create strategy that moves the needle. What does that mean and what does that look like? How do we each individually recreate our own reality to make community happen? How do we each individually have a piece of ownership in that? And then the last question, and this was really the first question that always has driven me is, why is there always so much talk about change, but it seems as if so little change actually happens? I'm going to say that one again. Why is there always so much talk of change, but it feels as if so little change actually happens? And these were the burning questions, and this is what I ended up writing these books about that came out in 2013 that Chancellor Chop referenced. The first piece of this, though, that I think becomes so important for really setting the frame of our discussion today is understanding that in the moment that we find ourselves today, as the Chancellor said, this is not a matter of doing the right thing. It is the world we live in today. And there is a perfect storm of dynamics that have taken this conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion and elevated it to an all-new level where it has to be prioritized strategically for college and universities, K through 12 institutions, the technology sector, government, across the board. Some of those dynamics is clearly, we all know the demographics and what those are, but we also see the educational trends. And when you have educational trends that look like this for black and brown children, and a demography that looks like this, where they're becoming the majority, you have a reality that must be addressed strategically, because now we're talking about a matter of national security. Now we're talking about a matter of global economic competitiveness. People ask me all the time, why did you step away from what you were doing in higher education to go work with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America? It's because we get up every day through our clubhouses across the world. We serve 4 million young people, particularly those who need us most. And if that's not the most important thing to be done, then absolutely what is? Now, Dr. Tuitt, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., Chancellor Chop, they're all a part of my higher ed family that I had a chance to re-encounter and reconnect with here. But I've also got some members of my new family here. Could I ask the members of the leadership team from the Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Denver to please stand to be recognized? Please give some love to them. Because when we talk about recognizing the champions of change, what we know is those champions of change have to exist in multiple spaces for us to truly elevate and strengthen the ecosystem, which is this conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The work that they do working with littles and tweens and teens, the work that you do in working with collegiates and graduate students, the work that happens in the corporate sector, it's all connected. And you see it play out all the time, more and more and more, the interconnectivity to it. That the conversations that are happening here have ripple effects to the conversations that have to happen over there. So we get back to this question, this first question. So what is diversity in the 21st century? And I always get this, it's, so what is it? So what is it? So what is it? The longest chapter of both of my books is the chapter, which is, what is diversity? That chapter just went on and 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 on, right? Because it's race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, disability, ability, economic background, privilege, power, all of those things, and all the ones I didn't say. And one of the things that I found, particularly as a chief diversity officer working in the academy or somebody trying to do this work in the academy, is that if you didn't say all the identities when you start talking about diversity, it was like you were committing an illegal moving violation. They throw the yellow flag on you. I throw the yellow flag on Vice Provost Williams for not saying disability. I throw the yellow flag on Chancellor so-and-so because she didn't say race. And what we found is this. At the end of the day, what matters less is the words you use. What matters more is the actions of what you do each and every day when you try to make a difference. And so I say that to all of you to embolden you. Don't allow not having the perfect word to inhibit you from becoming a part of the perfect narrative and the perfect conversation that can only be lived if we're in it together. I hate it when I see folks who want to get involved and get in the game and they're frozen because they don't have the right word to use. Damn that. Get in the game. But what I found equally important to those dimensions of diversity, or those identities, is importantly having a framework in which we think about it. And most importantly, having a framework in which we think about the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. And so for me, that framework centers on a couple things. One, access and equity, getting folks into our institutions and getting them out successfully, whether we're talking about time to promotion and tenure for women in the STEM faculty, whether we're talking about underrepresented students and completion of degrees in reasonable time spans of 4 to 5 and in a limited basis 6 years, whether we're talking about looking at where folks are completing degrees in. Are we tilted towards everybody getting degrees who are Latino? They're getting all the degrees in Latino studies? Or are we looking at, we can see a cross-section where folks are in lots of different places, because what we know is that while all areas are very important, some lead to different types of economic possibilities and transformation, and our economy is situated on some more than others now and moving into the future. But it's not just access and equity. It's also that piece that exists kind of in the middle and I think holds it all together. It's that notion of our campus climate and environment. Is it an inclusive environment? Do individuals who are members of the LGBTQ community feel included and engaged in that environment? And in what ways, importantly, are we building capability to make that happen? Do we have lactation centers for mothers who are nursing children? Do we have prayer and reflection areas that create spaces for folks to be humble and submit themselves to the will of their higher power? Do we have spaces of inclusion that allow for folks to express and to have an identity that lives itself natively in who they are? And at the same time, do we have spaces that bring folks together across those identities, that create that intergroup, that collaborative space for conversation, for sharing, for learning? The other pieces to this, and I think we don't spend enough time talking about it, is how are we building our research capability? How are we building our academic capability in the classroom to ensure that we are embracing the intellectual traditions of diversity? We're not just talking about head count. I'm talking about the white male who's come into this classroom context and is bringing something unique and enriching to the intellectual diversity of our environment. I'm talking about having centers and units that are engaged in cutting-edge research and scholarship, looking at the intersection of issues of race and power and privilege and global dynamics and national security. How are we engaging that, and how are we embracing that? Because in engaging and embracing it, we're engaging and embracing the world we live in today and the possibilities that we must be able to move through if we're going to go to where we need to go as a nation. But there's this other piece too, and it's this piece around preparing all students for a world that's diverse, global, and interconnected. I was at a dinner not too long ago. I was at the University of Chicago Booth School of Management dinner, and we were celebrating a number of their alumni. So it was a big alumni event. Boy, I tell you what, boy, any business school deans or faculty in the room here today? If I show of hands, any? None of the business school? Boy, I tell you what, nobody throws a party like those business schools. They had the corporate donors and the sponsors and the whole, they had ice sculptures and all types of shenanigans going on at this thing. And they were acknowledging 3 of their noted alumni. One was being acknowledged for corporate leadership. One was being acknowledged for not-for-profit social sector leadership. And another was being acknowledged for being an alum leader, and a young leader. And my friend had won the Young Leader Award. Michael Armstrong, who's a global vice president with Viacom and BET. And so Mike had won this award, and we were all there as his friends to support him. And we were sitting at his dinner, just as you're sitting at these dinners, at this lunch, around a table, and was having this conversation. And I was still at Wisconsin, had not left yet Wisconsin, and everybody's going around. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And when the conversation comes to what do you do, and you're the chief diversity officer, and you're with a whole table of folks that don't look like you, you don't quite necessarily know how to go there, right? Everybody is not Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., right? You don't quite necessarily know how to go there, right? And so I'm sitting there at the table, and I'm drinking my wine, and this guy, and white male, he had red hair, some real snazzy glasses, very well-tailored suit. He leans in, he says to me, "So, what do you do?" And I said, I work at the University of Wisconsin. I said, I'm vice provost for diversity, and blah, blah, blah. And when you say that, he's like, okay. Do you get oh, that's nice. Next topic. Or do you get something different? And so I said to the brother, I said, I work at the university. I do this, that, and the third. And he did this. He leaned in and he said my favorite thing. Students, faculty, staff, leaders, community leaders in the room, this is the best thing to say in any conversation. Can you say more? Because the notion of having someone saying more is about first seeking to understand and then to be understood. And there's always such power in that, particularly when we talk about moving beyond our bias to truly enable community. How do we first seek to understand, then to be understood? Not leading with your narrow thoughts of what is, but embracing the possibilities of what could be by hearing someone. So the brother leaned in and said, could you say more? I said, oh my goodness, of course I can say more. Where shall I begin? And so I said to him, I said, you know, I do this and I do that, and you know, and we're working on these initiatives and that initiatives. He said, I had no idea there were persons like you doing this work in higher education. He said, I had heard about, you know, we know about chief diversity officers in the corporate sector. And I said, well, what do you do? He said, well, I am a managing partner for one of the top 5 global management consulting firms in the world. And he said, I lead the mergers and acquisitions area for this firm. And he said to me, he said, you know, I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing at the university level. He said, and this is the reason why. He said, number one, he said, we can't find enough of the talented, diverse candidates that we want to hire. So that you're doing things to help us expand that pipeline, that we can find folks that are diverse, not just in terms of global international diversity, but are domestically diverse in terms of African Americans and Latinos and natives. He said, that is wonderful. The second thing he said was more interesting. He then said, I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, he said, because what we found is that the domestic students that we're recruiting, they oftentimes don't have the cultural skills to interact across difference that we want them to have. He said they don't have the competency skills. So that it's becoming an increased priority in your world is great. He said, because your graduates are my students that show up in my environment that I have to make sure are able to perform at a high level. He then said something that was even more interesting. And he starts speaking into the culture generationally around immediacy versus resilience and grit. One of my favorite topics is to talk about a growth mindset. Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. earlier, they talked about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. That you approach life knowing that life has infinite possibilities that are there for all of us if you are willing to humble yourself to what it takes to win and to pursue that pathway with grit and resilience and courage. He said, these young persons that I'm seeing, they want everything now. They want to just key it in and just get it today. They get there, they think they know everything, and they want to get promoted. He said, it's resilience that gets you there. And he said, the difference that I've seen is the international students have it in spades. He said, because they had to work so hard to get here. And he said there was a hunger there. You know, and so when I start to flip that and think about what we're doing in these environments and how we're trying to educate folks for a global knowledge economy, we've got to be giving them those skills. We've got to be giving them those experiences, whether that's study abroad, whether that's service learning, whether that's intergroup dialogue, whether that's general education diversity requirements in courses, not just, any class will fulfill the requirement, but actually having some learning goals that we want to accomplish, which is creating a context where folks are looking at the world, not just through their perspective, but through multiple perspectives, that they're having to find a way to think empathetically about what others are feeling, because we know socio-emotional intelligence is more important in many regards to long-term success than cognitive ability. How do we create these environments to do that? That's all about that pyramid there, and that's all about that other piece. So when I start talking about this work, I start talking about it from a perspective of leadership. You know, and what are these 5 key dimensions of leadership that I think are so important? One is, are we creating a context where folks can ideate and problem solve? Ideate and problem solve collaboratively. The secret of the 21st century world of leadership is that the technology means that solution teams are not bound by place and time, transformatively happening at all places, at all times, bound up in one interconnected, gigantic conversation. So how are we creating a context that teaches folks how to ideate and problem solve individually and as a part of a collective? Another piece of this, digital literacy. Digital literacy. So important. It's going to become a major priority of what we're doing in clubs across the country. I'm so excited about it. Helping folks to understand that it's not just about acquiring information from the internet, but it's about understanding and calibrating the goodness of that information. The stuff that's on TMZ is not the same as the stuff on the National Institute of Health website talking about what's going on in our communities, right? Digital literacy. But not just digital literacy from a consumption or even an analysis perspective, but digital literacy from a creation perspective. How many of us in this room right now who are faculty or staff would consider yourself to be digitally literate? Go on, y'all. Give us some love for being digitally literate, right? Key aspect of what we have to do to take the next step educationally is understanding who these digital native youth are. That for them, there's nothing more important than being social at all times. There's nothing more important than posting at all times. There's nothing more important than having a voyeuristic engagement and seeing what's going on and a like and at all times. What is the implication of that for our learning environments? What is the implication of that for diversity and inclusion? When you start to get into some of those commentaries that are on some of those feeds, it's horrific, the bullying that happens. It's horrific, the things that are said, all because we're hiding behind the veil of anonymity, help me with the word now, anonymity, rather than engaging the biases and having the real dialogue. And if post-secondary environments and contexts are not the spaces where we help folks to really understand how to do that and do it at a high level, then where does that exist and where does that happen? Communication abilities. I had a situation happen with a wonderful member of my team yesterday, and very talented, but a younger professional. And I host a huge conference. We host this conference for teenagers. It's called the Keystone Conference. Y'all taking some Keystoners? I'm telling you, Keystone Conference, woo, it's off the chain. Historically, about 1,300 teenagers, and there are 300 or 400 or so advisors. This year, yes, I am crazy, we have increased it to 2,500. So we will have 2,000 teenagers, 2,500 teens and advisors assembling in Dallas for a week-long leadership conference. It's going to be crazy. Note went out yesterday from a member of my team telling everybody across the country they got a refund. And they didn't have to pay to come to the conference. It was, say again, can you get their slot? You're coming, you're still coming. So it goes out, and it was just a slip of a keystroke, and it happens. And I haven't got back to talk to her yet, but when I do get back, I'm gonna put my arms around her and I'm gonna tell her, how do we learn from this lesson? How do we really build from it moving forward? How do we make sure we have 2, 3, and 4 people checking the process before it went? And I'll talk to her supervisor and supervisor's supervisor about that same thing. But I'll make sure to let her know that she is still valued. She should not lose confidence. She should just learn from this and grow from it, just as I had to learn and grow from my mistakes, and we all have had to do the same. But the challenge of what she did is she tried to send a cleanup note to the nation with a smiley face emoji. Right? Now that's where the challenge came in, right? The smiley face emoji did not make it better, right? But if we think about it, first seek to understand and then to be understood from a developmental perspective, a generational perspective of a young 20-something, that is sending a very powerful message of, my bad, I'm sorry, it's all good, sending something, right? But how do we really think about that, and how do we balance those traditional and new age ways of communicating? Leading and following in teams, and I won't say more about this because I've talked about it, and these skills of cultural ability and competence, being able to move and flow across lots of different places. You know, one of the things that really guided me to want to step into a new type of context to do this work was this model that's behind me now. And it's going to be the subject of my new book. And it's going to be the central new leadership model of where we're going with Boys and Girls Club. So club leaders, here we go. I am a huge believer that the greatest threat that we see in our communities is a threat of nihilism, an absence of meaning and hope, an absence of feeling as if you're part of something greater and that you have possibilities, a pathway to a future. I believe that is the greatest threat that exists. And I believe that the way you overcome that threat is you've got to have a clear understanding of, number one, what are you passionate about? When you saw Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. on the stage, you saw passion in that man. He just told me he is doing that full time. Give him some love for following his passions full time, because he's good at it. I've known him for nearly creeping up on 15 plus years. He had hair still, and I was about 30, 40 pounds lighter. But you got to have a clear sense of your passion. You've got to have a clear North Star understanding of your purpose. You've got to have a dogged belief that you can maximize all your God-given potential. And then the thing that lights it all up, you have to understand how to navigate the pathways of success. So many young people show up on our campus, particularly those who come from first-generation backgrounds. All they know is get a degree. Get a degree. Mama told them to get a degree. Grandma told them to get a degree. Somebody at school told them to get a degree. Get a degree is important, but that's only one part of the journey. And that's what we've learned, and that's what we're more and more embracing, particularly as we talk about how do we create these high-impact learning environments for students, right? And so what we know is that it's about having the right experiences. Experiences in the classroom, experiences in the real world. It's also about getting those credentials. But it's not just getting credentials, it's having a lifelong commitment to continuous learning, a lifelong commitment to the promise that you can be greater than you are today, that you can achieve more. I spent some time with the executive team of the university this morning, and I talked about this notion of more. People see the cars you drive. They see the lifestyle you have. They see the clothes you wear. They see the successes you've achieved. They see the books you've written. They see the championships that you've maybe won on the playing field of sport or the playing field of life, and they see more. But what they don't understand is that more is something very simple. More is struggle. More is struggle. More is never easy. More is struggle. So when we think about the moment that we're in now, talking about inclusive excellence, talking about how the University of Denver goes from maybe okay to good to great, we're talking about more. And we're not talking about something that's easy. We're talking about something that is extending of yourself. If you are a faculty member, it's asking the question, have I ever mentored somebody truly who looked different than me? If you're a student, and you know that you have a privileged position in some type of ways, it's reaching out and extending yourself to someone who looks different than you and saying, would you like to be a part of that? If you're a person who has that super sharp, penetrating ability to analyze the issue and see racism, sexism, homophobia 50,000 trillion miles away, you can see it coming and you're going to tell them you can see it coming, can you pull back just a little bit? Right? Can you pull back just a little bit off the intensity to say we can have a conversation together, we can be more together? So important for me. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing more power than the relationships that we have, right? You can have all the credentials in the world. You can have all the tier 1 experiences in the world. But if you don't have a Chancellor Chop who's going to sign off on you, if you don't have a mentor that's going to pull you to the side and say, you're going about that a little bit wrong. If you don't have a peer who's maybe the same age, the same space, same developmental everything that you're looking at and they're telling you something different to help you be better, then where are you truly going? And this other piece, and I started connecting to it just a second ago, this notion of role modeling. Role modeling and avoidance modeling. Role modeling and avoidance modeling. I'm always trying to identify where the role models and avoidance models are. And so at the core of the model is this idea of passion, purpose, potential, finding the pathways to get to where you want to do, lighting it up with experiences and credentials, relationships, and role models. and knowing that the only way we get there is with focus, resilience, time, and discipline. Now, this past weekend, I had the most glorious MLK holiday. I was with my family. The whole clan went down to Raleigh, Durham. And thank God we were down there last weekend and not this week, because we might still be down there if we were, from what I understand is going on in North Carolina right now. But we were down there. We had this amazing event, and I saw all of my family. And one of my cousins flew in, and you all know this cousin definitively. It's my first cousin, John Legend, right? Anybody heard of John Legend? You know John? Okay. So Johnny was there. Johnny was at this event. And everybody showed up for my aunt's 65 birthday party. It was a celebration of life event because she is a recent brain cancer survivor. Can we give some love to my auntie? And her beauty and her resilience and her grit and her spirit was shining so brightly. And she's just lived a life of giving. And we want her to live another 65 years of life of giving, serving in the community, because she worked in a low-income medical clinic working with children. But we were all there. And John is very interesting because everybody knows him as the international superstar, but they don't know him as the Penn honors graduate who graduated from Penn at 20, summa cum laude, and had all these opportunities to go on to great things in other arenas, not artistic, right? So when he was a freshman, I believe it was, freshman or a sophomore, he partnered with Lauryn Hill and collaborated on a song on the miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And everybody thought, oh, Johnny's about to blow up. No. However, continued to focus, continued to do his thing, graduated, was working at the Boston Consulting Group, one of the leading management consultancies in the world, was doing amazing things as a junior analyst, was going to go off to law school, and realized that he wasn't focused on his passions. Because his passion was to be an artist. His passion was to be a creator in that way. And so he stepped away in his early 20s from a nearly six-figure job and the possibilities of great income in that arena to pursue something that was very different. Working in the backdrop in and out of the art scene and the music scene in New York City. In the bar scene, in the club scene, in the lounge scene. Sometimes what I found is you got to step back to step up. And I found that lesson to be true in success in life, but also in diversity work. I found that to be true that sometimes you got to step back from how you're doing it and take a look at it. Is this the right diversity infrastructure for the institution? Or do we need to look at it a little bit differently? Do we have the right data that we're looking at? Do we need to look at it a little bit differently? Is the pedagogy that I'm using in my classroom doing this or doing this? And do I maybe need to do it a little bit differently? This is so much the hallmark of how we get there, these principles. Because at the end of the day, it's this notion of innovating diversity, right? Diversity is one of those things that if you're not innovating and creating change, then why are you doing it, right? If you're not trying to innovate and create change, then why are you doing it, right? There's this wonderful book that was authored by some Harvard University faculty members called The Innovator's DNA. Love this book. And they looked at innovators across sectors. So education, higher ed, not-for-profit, corporate, government, innovators. What's their DNA? And this is what they found about innovators. Number one, innovators are always questioning the world. Why not, how, what can, questions. It begins with the burning questions, my first slide. Second thing, innovators are always looking for solutions wherever they can find them. It's interesting. In higher education, strategy usually is mimicry. It's like, we want to mimic what somebody's doing that looks like us, or mimic what someone's doing that we aspire to be like, right? So every institution has their aspirational institutions, their peer group institutions. And don't get me wrong, having a clear sense of what they're doing is critical. But strategy is about establishing points of difference not points not being the same, particularly when you're talking about creating some distinctiveness that elevates you. And so what I found is that to really build out these solutions, you've got to be looking for the solution wherever you can find it. The solution for some diversity challenge might be at some community college in the Pacific Northwest. Or it might be at Yale University on the East Coast. I don't know. But you've got to be willing to peer into and find solutions wherever you can and never be limited by the convention of this is how it has to be done or how we've always done it. The third thing in this is why I love diversity summits. It's this notion of bringing folks together in what I refer to as an innovation hotspot, right? When you bring folks together, you create new possibilities because we can have a shared and collaborative dialogue. We can be in community. We can bounce ideas. We can ideate off of one another. We can go to another level of intensity and clarity in our thinking about what's possible. So one of the things that I would offer as a recommendation, perhaps for next year's summit, or don't have to wait for next year's summit, where is the space for the collaborative ideation against the challenges that you face today? Right? Where is that space at? Because when we come together, that's how we truly hack a problem. I just left Silicon Valley. I was in San Francisco a week before last, and the rage in the city, and has been for years now, is these hack events. They bring together super smart people and throw a problem in the middle of the table and say, let's figure it out. No place has more human capital than college and universities. We should be hacking things and trying to figure out what the solution is to help us move forward. The fourth piece is you have to have a culture of experimentation. Culture of experimentation. It's about doing, people. One of the favorite things that my boss says to me, that's a great idea. How are we going to do it? Because we live in a world where it's all about delivery. How are we going to light it up? Not talk about it. How are we going to light it up? The other piece of this, once you light it up and you figured it work, how do you scale it? Right? How do you go broad with it? How do you go bigger with it? Right? So you try, you figure it out, you learn, you go bigger. And as we stand in the wake of the King holiday, I want to take a special moment just to go real slow with this last one, because this connects right back to your theme. Leading with courage. It's all this fancy new technology and all these fancy new strategies, and I've written these tomb of books which lay out everything that's possible. But at the end of the day, it does come back to this notion of leading with some courage. Having a willingness to be a tempered radical, right? Tempered because you know you're working within the context of the system, but radical because you're trying to improve and enhance that system. That you're willing to step up and step out to something new. That you're willing to lead with courage. I've got about 15 minutes or so. Those 15 minutes and a chance to have some questions and interaction are more important to me than anything in the rest of these slides. I'm going to stop right here and open us up for questions and conversation. Is there a floating mic somewhere? Yes? Questions, comments from anybody? And see, and I ain't like Eddie. I believe in the Socratic method. I'll come find you somewhere in the room and say, oh, Mr. Provost. No. Yes, right here.
Hi, Damon. I've been reading you for a long time, so I'm glad to finally be in the same room with you. The hacking idea is a brilliant one, and actually one that we have outlined in our strategic plan is this notion of sort of taking big ideas and working together. I'd love to hear if you've implemented something similar to Silicon Valley in higher ed, and how you got academics, administrators, students sort of collaborating on innovative problem solving.
Yeah, you know, the answer to that is yes and no. So the yes of it is our diversity forum that I used to host at Wisconsin. We weren't using the language hack, but it always had that built into it. And we oftentimes use the World Cafe methodology, which many of you are very familiar with, to really kind of get at it. I think hack puts a different type of cultural context on it, right? It sexies it up a little bit, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because I think it creates some gravity and some pull for some folks. In my current world, this is one of the things we're really, really thinking a lot about. So right now, we're in the midst of developing the new Boys and Girls Clubs of America strategic plan, Vision 2025. And so we've been going across the country and having all the conversations that you have to have in creating that plan. But the greatest challenge that I'm confronted with right now today is the teen challenge. And so I talked about this threat of nihilism and a lack of hope. And, there's so many teenagers who are out in our communities aimless in the 4 to 9 o'clock p.m. time. And we've got to do a better job as Boys and Girls Clubs of America, period. Everybody has to do a job. We got to do a better job. And so that's a major focus for us. So I just had a strategy meeting yesterday. And we're working on a whole new digital strategy, a digital youth development strategy. But I had a group of team, and we came up with an idea. I thought it was brilliant. I don't know. It get your thought. We're going to take this teen challenge, and we're going to identify the Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat famous teens in our movement across the country, right? And we're going to fly them into Atlanta and have them hack the challenge of how do we use social media to create positive, penetrating energy with teens to let them know about the possibilities of Boys and Girls Club. I thought that was a pretty big idea. And so it's something that's coming in the future around that. But it's something I'm really trying to embrace. It's the new paradigm of solution building in organizational life. And there's not a lot of folks that are really expert at it, but it is, it's all of these digital learning communities. And you're starting to see some little case studies showing up. Like they just cracked the sequencing of some disease using this type of solution building technique globally. I was reading about it on a plane somewhere. And so it's something that I really want to get great at. And so one of the things that I do, if you go back to that will model and at the top said credentials, I'm all about self-directed, independent learning plans across the life course, not just as a student, across the life course, and I'm always creating them. So that's actually one of the topics I want to get really, really razor sharp in. Other questions, comments from anybody? Sure, we'll double down right here in the middle.
This is a question that Dr. Frank Tuitt asked the panel of Chief Diversity Officers yesterday. We'd love to have you weigh in on. Considering the challenging times we find ourselves in at this moment in higher education, what advice would you give to those in the audience who might be considering the CDO role as a career option?
Great question. Great question. First thing I would say is spend as much time learning about the science of change management and leadership as you do the issues of diversity. What has made me effective is not that I knew more about issues of identity and race and sexuality. What made me effective is that I knew how to get things done, which came back to understanding, strategy, structure, processes, people, reward systems. It came with understanding that you have to know how to connect with faculty in their language and talk about these things in their language. Talk about action-based research projects, because an action-based research project is one that they're engaging in to engage a diversity challenge, or talking about cluster hiring as a technique for strengthening our faculty, but we also know that's going to lead to diversifying our faculty. That we understand we have an entrepreneurial culture in the academy, right? Pursuing external research grants. But if we want to create innovation energy, how do we flip that and have internal dollars that we can compete for, and we engage and create energy around that? That's about creating a pull strategy of change, right? But also accountability techniques, which is more of a push strategy of change, right? And that could be built institution-wide, where the chancellor gives an annual report to the board, right? Or it can be each and every dean or VP of every area has to have an annual statement of what they accomplished for diversity as a part of the budget hearings. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can build accountability techniques, but the importance is to have that sweet science of change to go with diversity. The third piece, and my new colleague, what's your name? That Barbara and I were talking about earlier today. If you're going into the strategic diversity leadership business, A third tool in the toolkit that I would recommend is around marketing, communication, framing, narrative building. Hugely important. Because, and not just for diversity, but really across the board, the pace of change and the interconnectivity of how, somebody could say something and next thing you know it's pop in Bosnia and one of your faculty over here is talking to me. You've got to have an ability to, in a sophisticated way, respond and build stuff on the front end. And I think that that's another kind of a third piece that I would really add to the toolkit now. Let's go right over here.
Hi, I tend to be the token person who gets invited to be part of boards, and I'm tired of this private club mentality where I should be happy to be the youngest one, the foreign one, the look, and the minority or whatever. And I've run with leadership ideas, and it's like, come on, guys, let's do this, and let's get things going. And then I'm like getting the sense like you're part of this club. You've got to be happy. You're on this so-called, high executive board, but we don't want you getting too excited. We don't want you really expressing your ideas. Sit pretty, be happy, and that's not my style. And, also as a woman, too, I was at DU. I'm a DUite. And we were promised flex time and all of these wonderful promises, and I ended up, a widow with a 3-month-old baby, and I couldn't career track the way I could have. I wasn't able to fulfill my full potential because I didn't have cooperation from corporate or government, to help me with childcare and things like that. I had 3 kids, I raised 3 gifted kids, all DUites in a sense. So what I'm saying is like I couldn't fulfill my full potential, and now I'm really scared with this American environment because I get hammered by the right, and then I'm also getting hammered by the liberal progressives.
I'm gonna have to stop you because you're just going too deep for me.
Oh God, sorry.
I'm gonna have to stop you right there.
Okay.
But let me comment to what you said. There's so much in what you said. One piece of it is as individuals who disrupt space or make space look different because of their identity characteristic, whether that's gender or race, ethnicity, or sexuality, or whatever the case may be, I think we have to understand the power that's in that, and sometimes be willing to say, no, I'm going to keep that over here. That's not a good board for me to be a part of. That's a space where I feel perhaps I'm going to be tokenized. I think that's a part of it. I think another part of it is in those spaces, I think it's understanding what did you go into that space to accomplish? And how do you use different tactics to accomplish different outcomes? One of the other areas of reading that I've been spending a lot of time going deep in is around espionage and around donor cultivation, right? Because a lot of what I found in terms of diversity work, it's about working behind the scenes and cultivating an asset, right? Cultivating an asset, right? When you're working in the donor cultivation world, you don't show up on the first day and ask for $20 million, right? You show up on the first day and say, hey, how are you doing? I'd love to learn more about your priorities and what's interesting to you. Oh my gosh, did you get my Christmas card? Oh, I'm going to be in your region. I'd love to sit down for coffee and lunch. Let me tell you about this exciting thing that we're doing at the thing with the thing that's going to transform the thing. Did you see that new article that came out about the thing and the thing? You know what? How can I help? Can I have $20 million? Right? So the same thing with diversity work. Same thing with diversity work. You have to find persons who have the potential to step out and step up and be greater than they are today to be a part of that conversation, right? And it may be going to that measured, balanced faculty member who is fair, who loves that institution with all their heart and soul and have given everything to it. And they're not closed to the idea of diversity, but they just haven't been a card-carrying, flag-bearing, torchbearer for it. How do you start cultivating that person, right? Slowly. How do you start building them up? Hey, I'm going to the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity. I'd love if you might go as a part of our party. Well, I don't do research in that area, and I don't learn. That's okay. We're taking so-and-so and so-and-so as well. Also, too, sometimes you can't be the messenger of cultivation. You have to get somebody who looks like them, who speaks the language of them, has the same idiosyncrasy, credibility as they do, and you ask them to go make the ask and get the conversation moving. This is not a linear thing. This is not simple mathematics. This is calculus, right? This is differential equations. This is a solution within a solution within a solution within a play. Someone else, anywhere, anything. I know I don't have much time left. Let's take one right there in the middle. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I love your idea of the tempered radical.
Yes.
I think I might be one.
Yes.
I hadn't heard that term before, but, you know, I'm not the person who's going to start a demonstration or lead the rally and all that, but I feel very passionate about a lot of things that involve diversity. So how do you get your voice heard when you're not the loudest voice in the room, but you still feel the passion and have so much to contribute? Yes. But, you know, the loudspeakers and the big scary people are kind of dominating the conversation.
That's powerful. And let me give attribution to Dr. Deborah Meyerson of Stanford University, who is the author of the book Tempered Radical, and coined the term based on organizational feminist research that she did looking at issues of diversity and inclusion in the corporate sector. And what she found is that those who were most effective getting things done were not the folks who were those big voices, who were rah, 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 rah. It was those quiet, unassuming, tempered radicals who were doing the work, right? Who were doing the work. You know, some people are doing so much talking, other people are doing so much walking, you know, and it's not about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk. And that oftentimes doesn't take a neon light blinking to truly be effective in that. The final thing I will say is this. I was at Valparaiso University maybe a decade plus ago, and I came down and I was lecturing, and I was later in the day, but one of the faculty members, who was a long-standing, seasoned member of the faculty, who had been a legendary disruptor for years, right? And I respect that contribution, right? I respect it tremendously. He found out I was there. He saw my bio, and he was very influential with his students, right? And I'll never forget how he saw me, he looked at, and he left. And he came back with this really kind of tattered, like 5 pages, right? And it was a speech he had been given for about 25 plus years. And he got up there before me, and he gave the most compelling, insightful, burn the thing down narrative that had ever been given in the 20th century. And I never forget this student, that was a very small female student, she raised her hand and she said, "But what do I do?" It's not about rabble-rousing. It's not about talking the loudest. It's about getting there every day, giving a little bit of your privilege to make the world a little bit better for someone else. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.